Hey, welcome in to Make Your Money Matter. I'm your host, Brad Barrett. I'm also a managing director and partner here at One Capital Management. And today on our show, we're going to talk about the timeline of the United States federal debt. And I'm going to go all the way back to Independence Day 1776. But before we get started, make sure to smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell so you don't miss a single episode. All right, let's get into it. Okay, so I'm bringing this up today, obviously, because of the U.S. debt ceiling debate that's been going on, and it's really kind of coming to fruition now. And I want to share something I shared actually a couple weeks ago that probably a more useful debate, in my opinion, as I shared again this before, after this debt ceiling is raised and we get this done, is how to actually make the government more fiscally responsible. I think we all can agree with that. Friends, as a financial advisor of nearly 2 decades, debt is fine, often good. In fact, sometimes so long as there's an ability to service it, to service the debt. And even more to that point, in the government's perspective, it's also adding to the economy's expansion. So with that said, I think it's important here to go back. Let's contextualize some of these conversations as many of you out there are looking at your investments in your retirement plan and relating it to what's going on with the US debt. Now, we as a nation, independent since July 4th, 1776, hear this loud and clear. We've never been without debt. Let that sink in for a second. And in saying that, let me share with you the timeline that I went through here. I spent some time on this. And again, I went all the way back to 1776. Our Continental Congress could not finance the Revolutionary War with large tax raises because why? That was the exact reason why we were in the situation of becoming independent, because the British was unreasonably taxing us with their unjust taxation. And that's what actually made the rebellion of the colonists, us, against Britain to begin with. So we couldn't do that. So instead, what did we do? We actually borrowed money from other nations. Here's a quick breakdown. Ben Franklin secured loans of over $2 million from the French government. John Adams secured a loan from a Dutch banker as well as some domestic creditors. And actually, real quick fun fact, when the Revolutionary War was over and ended in 1783, at that time they formed the newly formed Department of Finance, and it reported the US debt to the American public for the first time. And actually, at that point is actually when Congress took action to raise taxes. So here's the first timestamp here. At that time, the total debt for the United States was at $43 million. All right, moving forward. 1815, after the War of 1812, it had caused the national debt to increase to $119.2 million. Quick aside here, Andrew Jackson actually sold off federally owned land, actually Western land, and cut spending on infrastructure to actually pay off and pay down the national debt after only 6 years in office. I find that actually fascinating. Okay, moving forward. Civil War, 1860s. Here, it cost $5.2 billion, the Civil War did, when it ended, and really caused the national debt to balloon to our next timestamp here of $2.6 billion. Now, the Great Depression, with government assistance programs really started by FDR, it caused the national debt to now hit $33 billion. Now, after that, after lending other countries money to help pay for their military costs for World War II through our alliance, our national debt hit $285 billion. All right, let's fast forward here a little bit to the 1980s, the Reagan era. With the increases in defense spending in that decade, if you will, coupled with the tax cuts, caused the national debt to grow to $2.7 trillion, noted here. Now, what I want to say here, though, is from there until well into the early 2000s, there was actually a very minimal increase in the federal debt. But on the other side, there was actually quite a large increase in GDP and GDI. I think that's interesting. Now, speaking of the early 2000s, in 2005, the federal deficit at that point was more than $8.1 trillion. But after that, the Great Recession came. 2008, 2009, financial crisis. It had grown our national debt to $12.3 trillion. Now, here's where we move into recent history. Fast forward, obviously, to the pandemic of 2020, followed by multiple rounds of stimulus packages, and our national debt at that point is at $28.2 trillion by the end of April 2021. We right now, currently, in mid-2023 here, are at about $31 trillion and counting. Here's what I want to share with the background of the timeline of the US debt context. As of March 2023, so a few months ago, it cost us this, $384 billion to maintain the $31 trillion in debt, which, if you look at math very quickly, that's 12%. It's 12% of the total federal spending goes to servicing our debt. Now, further to that point, the average interest rate the US, the government, pays to borrow money as of the end of last year was 2.07%. So, that said, with nominal economic growth of 4%, to me as an advisor, as an economic planner, if you will, as an investment manager, there's actually plenty of growth out there to cover the costs of borrowing. I am not saying by any means that having debt and increasing debt is not a good thing, but let me give you an analogy here. Our debt is at $31 trillion, our debt. If you look at the US as a whole, our assets across the board are right around $200 trillion. So let me put this into our world as a perspective. If you relate that to, say, a mortgage, okay, something you and I can understand, because let's be honest, trillions of dollars is just ludicrous to even think about. If you have a $31,000 mortgage and a $200,000 property, are you overly concerned on that mortgage? Probably not. Now, I'm not gonna, answer that for you. It's up to you. But what you might be concerned about is that the $31,000 in my example might be increasing. And I agree with you. But you also are being able to service it because you are actually bringing in, back to the US's example, 4% and you're paying 2.07 in my analogy here. Does that make sense? We're going through this in the sense of taking these $1 trillion of debt down to our world of saying, okay, I don't want the debt increasing, but I also don't mind the fact that I have assets here and we have a viable, country here that, has sustainability. So again, remember, raising the debt ceiling right now allows the government to service the debt it already has. That's important. So this timeline, if you will, is really more of a context. It's understanding that we as a nation have always had debt. Right or wrong, it's a fact. So how we use it is really what matters going forward. And I think all of us need to look at that as we relate it to our investments and really our emotions of what we're reacting to or maybe not reacting to nowadays in the market. Hey, hope you enjoyed that. If you did, make sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss a single episode. And always remember to make your money matter.